This happened about 5 years ago. My mom, dad, and I were camping at Mary Jane Furston State Park, just outside of Grand Rapids, Ohio. It was sometime around the end of August or the beginning of September, and our campsite was in front of the campgrounds. Leading up to the two separate incidents, we occasionally heard what we thought could have been a bird or some kind of screaming or screeching up in the trees. Or at least, it sounded like it was coming from the top of the trees. We would hear it almost every single night, but in a different location. We would listen to it in the trees behind us, and then the next night it would come from the other end of the campground. Then, the night after, we would hear it from across the road. I've listened to the sounds of different animals, including owls, to see if it was the noise we were hearing, but nothing was even close. Occasionally, we would hear what sounded like branches being snapped, but we thought nothing of it really. I had my tent, and that detail is essential, as it factors into the second incident. The first incident that I want to talk about happened when my dad woke up in the middle of the night to what sounded like someone rummaging through the ice chest between our tents. He said he heard whoever or whatever it was shut the cooler and walk away. He told my mom and me about it the next day. The odd thing is that everything was still present in the cooler. Nothing seemed to be missing. The second incident happened the night after the first one, and I had a small TV and game console in my tent. It was like one of those portable ones that you could plug things into. It was pretty cool. I was watching a movie when I heard something approaching our campsite. Whatever went through our cooler, I think was doing the same thing the next night. I could listen to the ice moving around as it was rummaging through it. I was as still and as quiet as possible, but whoever or whatever was there knew I was awake because it decided to put its massive hand on the side of my tent and push it in just a little bit. I was frozen with fear and did not know what to do. It felt like forever, but was only about 20 seconds before it took its hand away from my tent and walked away. I didn't even think about it. I was looking everywhere. I looked for tracks the next day the moment light went out, but I did not see anything. As far as I know, we don't really have bears in this part of Ohio, so I don't think it was a bear. Despite going through it twice, this thing did not take anything from the ice chest. I was afraid when it touched my tent and pushed it in a little bit. I think I might have even peed a little bit. We don't think it was a homeless person, and we are pretty sure it wasn't other campers, as there wasn't many other people in the campground with us. But I'm not saying it wasn't any of those options, but I'm just a bit freaked out. I had planned a morning hike alone at Silver Pine State Park because it was quiet this time of year, and I wanted some space to think. The lot at the trailhead was empty except for one beat-up pickup at the far edge. I grabbed my pack, made sure I had water and a small snack, and started along the southward trail. It was early October. The trees were changing, reds and yellows just starting to break through the green. The air was sharp and crisp, and the sun had not quite climbed high enough up to reach the trail floor. The first 40 minutes were uneventful. The path wound up gently, exposed roots catching my boots occasionally, squirrels darting in the underbrush, a few woodpeckers hammering at the trunks. I took the trail slow, letting myself notice the way the sunlight dappled the leaves. Nothing unusual, just the park being exactly what I expected. Then, I reached a part of the trail that was not marked on any of the maps that I had. It was narrow, overgrown, and looked like it had not been walked much in years. The trail bent sharply downhill and disappeared under a low canopy. I paused, weighing the idea of turning back, but I didn't. I had my pack, I had water, and I told myself I was curious. I stepped down. The canopy made the light softer, green-tinged, and the trail was slippery with damp leaves. The air had a different feel here, cooler and heavier. It wasn't oppressive, but definitely dense. I noticed something about the way the branches hung. A lot of the smaller twigs and vines were stripped of leaves, but not torn naturally. It looked deliberate, like someone had brushed against them and removed them over time. I stepped carefully to avoid making noise, thinking maybe someone used this as a shortcut. I had not gone far when I noticed that the ground ahead was not just leaf-covered dirt. There were depressions, shallow, about the size of a boot, but not quite regular-sized. Something had walked through here, or maybe it wasn't walking at all. My first instinct was to dismiss it. Could have been a deer, a hiker who cut through. I crouched down to inspect one, and realized the impressions were not consistent with walking. They were too shallow in some places and much deeper in others, like someone or something had been pressing down with parts of their body that I could not account for. I shook my head, stood up, and just kept on going. About 50 feet ahead, the trail opened up into a clearing. The sunlight was stronger here, warming my face, and I exhaled without thinking. The clearing was, strange. Not big, maybe 20 feet across, but perfectly circular, bordered by low boulders and old, knotted roots. The ground inside it was bare dirt. Not bare like the trail, bare like it had been cleaned. There wasn't a twig or a leaf in sight. I stepped closer and noticed the pattern in the dirt. Small ridges, just a set of parallel lines that ran in one direction, then turned sharply to run perpendicular. The lines were shallow, like someone had drawn them with a stick or a foot or a finger. I bent down, tracing one with my finger. The dirt felt dry, but the impression didn't crumble. I tested it with more pressure. It held. I took out my water bottle and poured a small stream across the lines. The water soaked into the soil unevenly, almost like it was moving around the lines instead of straight down. I looked up. Nothing. No animals, no movement. Just the trees at the edge of the clearing. The ridge sloped gently back into the forest. No obvious way in or out, except the trail that I came from. And then I noticed the trees at the far edge. Their bark was scored. There were long vertical grooves in the bark, maybe a foot or more high. They weren't claw marks. It looked as though the trees had been shaved or scraped by hand. They were evenly spaced along the trunk, all facing toward the center of the clearing. I felt my heart rate speed up. I hadn't seen another person, but the clearing did not feel empty. I felt watched, even though I could see nothing moving. I took a step back toward the trail. The leaves rustled faintly, but no wind. Then I saw it. Something at the far edge of the clearing, standing behind a tree. I couldn't make out what it was. It was tall, thin, and it wasn't moving. The shape was vaguely human. I froze, debating whether to run or stay. After a long moment, it moved. It stepped from one tree to another, silently, landing in the shade, stopping whenever the sunlight hit its body. Each movement was slow and precise, like it was studying me as it went. My first instinct was to pull out my phone and take a picture, but I was shaking so hard it slipped out of my hands before I could, and by that point I was freaking out. I started walking backwards slowly. The figure did not even follow. It just stayed at the edge of the clearing, but the sense of being observed never left. I counted the steps in my head, trying to gauge the distance. When I reached the trail, I broke into a jog without turning around. The forest closed in again, sunlight breaking through in patches, normal sounds returning. I could finally hear birds, wind, and the faint hum of insects again. I stopped after 10 minutes, crouched behind a fallen log, and caught my breath. I wanted to convince myself it was a trick of the light or a tree shaped oddly, but it wasn't a trick. I don't know how long I stayed hidden, long enough to calm down, long enough to tell myself I was imagining things. Eventually I got back to the main trail. Sunlight fully hit the path, birds chirping, squirrels running, other hikers coming toward me. Nothing to suggest that anything had happened here, nothing at all. I left the park immediately. I did not look back. I haven't told anyone, not even my closest friends. It would sound insane. A person who isn't a person, a circle cleared perfectly in the dirt, lines in the soil that didn't behave normally. I don't know why it didn't move toward me, why it didn't leave the clearing entirely. I don't even know if it wanted me to leave, but I know I was close enough to be noticed, and I know that whatever it was patient. I have not been back, and I won't. It was late October a few years back when I had the most terrifying experience of my life. I was working as a ranger at a remote state park in the mountains. I won't be specific, for the sake of privacy. The park was officially closed for the season, but we kept a skeleton crew on to do maintenance, look after the equipment, and keep an eye out for trespassers, which the place got a lot of. I drew the short straw and was put on the night shift alone at the main ranger station. Most nights were dead quiet, though, with only the sound of the wind in the pines and an occasional car passing on the highway a few miles away. To pass the time, I would watch movies, read books, and whittle little wood carvings, anything to stay awake and not let the eerie stillness get to me. as it so often does. This one night around 2 a.m., I was in the back room making a cup of coffee when I heard a foot against the side of the building. Probably just a pine cone falling on the roof, I thought. Then I heard it again, a thud, and again, a louder thud. I froze. The foots continued moving along the wall. It sounded like heavy, deliberate footsteps, but that was impossible. I was the only one out here. The thuds reached the corner of the building, heading towards the front door. My heart pounded as I crept towards the front room. I peered out the window. The floodlight illuminated the gravel driveway and the edge of the forest. I didn't see anything, but the footsteps were getting closer, crunching on the gravel now. Something was out there, circling the building, doing something against the wall, now approaching the door. Whatever it was big. I backed away from the window, my hand shaking as I unclipped the holster of my sidearm. Then the footsteps stopped right outside the door. Suddenly, wham! The door shuddered as something slammed into it, rattling the frame. I jumped back, drawing my gun and aiming it at the door with trembling hands. Another wham. The door buckled from another impact. The lock and deadbolt strained to hold. There was a crash. The door frame splintered as the door burst open. A dark shape loomed in the doorway. I screamed and fired. The hulking figure only staggered, but kept coming forward. I turned to run. Behind me, a deep, raspy breathing came. I sprinted to the back room and slammed the door shut, fumbling with my keys. I managed to lock it. I grabbed the desk and shoved it against the door as a barricade. Then bam, the thing rammed against the door. The desk shuddered, but held. I could hear it walking around outside, its heavy breathing snuffling around the door. I backed into the corner and sank down, gun trained on the door. My radio crackled alive, startling me. "Dave, come in, over." It was Mike, my supervisor, doing the regular check-in from the ranger station on the other side of the park. Mike, I need help. There's something trying to get in here. It broke down the front door. I'm trapped in the back room. Get help. Hurry." I hissed into the radio. "Whoa, slow down. What's going on?" "What do you mean something's trying to get in?" "I don't know. A bear, maybe. I don't really know what it is. Just get help." "Alright, sit tight. I'm calling for backup. Just stay calm and don't do anything stupid." The radio went silent. The thing outside the door had gone quiet too. Was it listening to us? For a moment, all I could hear was the blood pounding in my ears. Then there was a clatter from the front room that made me flinch. It sounded like furniture being knocked over. There was a pause, and then more clattering, moving further away. After a few moments, I could not hear anything, but my heart was still racing. I crept to the door and put my ear against it, gun ready in my trembling hands. Finally, I began to hear vehicles pulling up outside, shouts, radio squawking, beams of flashlight sweeping across the windows. Dave, you in there?" Mike's muffled voice came from the other side of the door. I wanted to cry in relief. I pushed aside the desk and opened it up. The front room was trashed, chairs overturned, maps and papers scattered everywhere, the front door hanging off of its hinges, but no sign of my intruder. "What the heck happened here?" Mike asked, surveying the damage. "Something tried to break in. It got in the front room, obviously, but it didn't get to the back. I shot at it too. The thing just kept coming. It cornered me back there. Thought it was going to get through the door." "What was it? Did you get a good look?" He picked up a shell casing and frowned. "Looks like you aren't lying." "Mike, I don't know what it was. It was dark, I couldn't really see. It was big though, not like any bear I'd ever seen." I could barely get those words out. My throat was tight with fear. "Well, it's gone now. Took off into the woods, it looks like." He nodded at the muddy tracks leading away from the porch. "Let's get this cleaned up. You can write up a report in the morning." I didn't sleep a wink that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that dark shape filling the doorway. I turned in my report, but I could not give a clear description of what it was. Obviously, the department seemed skeptical of my story, but they could not deny the damage to the ranger station. They brought in a wildlife expert to examine the tracks, but even he couldn't definitively say what had made them. "Could be a bear," he said, scratching his head, "but I've never seen bear tracks quite like this." In the following weeks, I tried to put the incident out of my mind, focusing on my work. Every night shift filled me with dread. I jumped at every noise, every shadow. I started to carry a higher caliber weapon, and I was very particular about keeping the doors and windows shut and locked. My colleagues noticed the change in me. They would give me concerned looks when they thought I wasn't watching, whispering behind my back. I knew they thought I was probably losing it, and maybe I was. About a month after the attack, I was out on a routine patrol of the hiking trails. It was a crisp, clear day, and the forest was peaceful. I almost felt at ease as I rounded a bend in the trail. I spotted something on the ground ahead. I approached cautiously. It was a deer, or what was left of one. The carcass had been brutally mauled, flesh torn, bones crushed. The surrounding foliage had been trampled and splattered with blood. Quite clearly the work of a predator, but far more vicious than your average mountain lion or coyote. A chill ran down my spine as I remembered that thing that had come after me that night. Could it have done this? I looked around wearily, suddenly feeling very exposed out there in the woods. I radioed it in, and soon the site was crawling with rangers and wildlife officers. They took samples, snapped photos, looked for tracks, but just like the ranger station, they could not find any definitive evidence of what killed the deer. Over the next few months, more animal mutilations turned up in the park. Deer, elk, one of them even a black bear. Each one was more gruesome than the last, and always no clear tracks, no viable evidence of the killer. Rumors began to spread among the park staff. Some thought it was a rogue cougar or a wolf pack. Others whispered about something unnatural, a creature that defied explanation. I knew they were all dancing around what I'd seen that night, but no one wanted to say it outright. As the attacks continued and grew closer to the hiking trails and campgrounds, the park superintendent grew increasingly concerned. He brought in a team of experienced hunters to try to track and kill the creature, whatever it was. I was assigned to guide the hunters through the backcountry. As much as the thought of confronting the thing terrified me, I also desperately wanted answers and a resolution. For days, we tracked through the rugged terrain, following faint trails and signs of the supposed creature's passing. We did find more grisly kills, but the beast itself remained elusive. It seemed to be toying with us, always one step ahead, wanting us to find those brutal remains. One evening, as we were setting up a camp in a dense patch of forest, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. It sounded almost human, but distorted and feral. The hunters grabbed their weapons and ran toward the sound. One of the hunters ahead of us crouched down in a small clearing, laying his rifle on the ground beside him. He was staring into the trees, his face white with shock. "I saw it," he whispered as we approached. It looked right at me. "What was it? What did you see?" I asked, my heart pounding. He shook his head, unable to find the words. Not natural. Those eyes." He trailed off, shuddering. A twig snapped in the forest behind us. We spun around, rifles raised. Something large was moving through the underbrush, circling us. We could hear its heavy breathing, the crunching of its footsteps. Then it emerged from the trees, and I felt my blood turn to ice. It was just as I remembered, that hulking, shadowy figure, vaguely humanoid but far too large. Its eyes glinted in the fading light. The hunters, now sure it was not a person, aimed and fired together. Whatever it was, roared a grumbling roar, a sound that seemed to shake the very ground beneath us. Then it did something that we didn't expect. A creature who had just taken a full barrage of bullets charged at us. The entire group scattered. I heard screaming behind me, but I ignored it, just running blindly, crashing through the forest. My only thought was to get away, to stay alive. I don't know how long or how far I ran. Eventually, I stumbled into a small stream and fell to my knees, gasping for breath. The forest had gone quiet again. No sign of the hunters, and, thankfully, no sign of the creature. It was deep into the night by the time I found my way back to the main park roads. I staggered into the ranger station, covered in scratches and bruises, my clothes torn. The superintendent was there, along with a group of grim-faced park police and the hunters who had been attacked. Well, except for one. all but one of the hunters had made it back. The official story was it had been a bear attack. The park was closed for some time, and a massive search began for the missing man, but I knew how it would end. Maybe I was scared, paranoid, and pessimistic, but I knew what the results would be, because whatever it was out there was beyond our understanding, and I don't think it would like to leave things alive. In the following months, I retreated into myself. I couldn't shake the memory of that night in the forest. The sheer terror of coming face to face with it not once but twice. I would never feel safe in the woods again, but more than that, I was haunted by the idea that it was still out there. So, obviously, I don't work at the park anymore, and now, every interest and passion I had in the outdoors is dead, because every time I'm out in the trees, I can't stop thinking about what happened. Hey, hope you've enjoyed the story so far. If you want to hear more, make sure to subscribe, like the video, and leave a comment, because it lets YouTube know you like the content and helps more people to see these videos. My next big goal for the channel is 100,000 subscribers, and as a celebration, I will be doing a Q&A video once we hit that goal. Thank you, and back to the stories. This story took place in Thermopolis, Wyoming. At the beginning of June of 2023, my girlfriend and I stayed there for a week-long vacation. We walked by the Hot Springs State Park River one night after dinner. Across the river and up the bank, the road goes past T Hill. It is named for the letter T and is made of white rock on its side to represent Thermopolis. The year previous, I hiked up this hill. A small portion of the trail is visible from the road, and you can see bits and pieces continuing upward if you look closely. I am very familiar with it, as it took me an hour or so to reach the top, and I have visited Thermopolis in the park many times. Back to the night in question. The sun had just set, some rain was falling, and the storm had passed by about an hour or so beforehand. I noticed a bright white-blue light on T Hill as we admired the river. The light was on the established trail moving up. I pointed the light out to my girlfriend. I said it was definitely not a flashlight with the rate of speed it was moving, and how smooth it was, as the light was more like a ball than a beam. We both wondered if someone was going on a night hike up a steep demanding trail in the rain, but we decided that was probably not the case. The light was moving much faster than any person hiking could. She suggested a person biking up the hill. That was the only logical explanation as far as we could tell. So, we stood there and waited to see this person either go around the switchback to continue up the hill or turn back to come down. We returned to our truck and parked it in a lot with a higher vantage point to look for it. The strange light did not reappear, and we waited for easily 20 or 30 minutes. After a short drive back to my mom's house, where we were staying at the time, we told her about what we had seen. She didn't really seem surprised, and said the locals and tourists reported strange lights in the hills and mountains, visible outside the town and within the park. She also told me that someone had died on the trail years ago, and it was likely many of her souls had perished out there as well. Wyoming at night has an unsettling vibe. I can feel it in the pit of my stomach every time I'm out there. It is mostly still a very wild place. The state has the smallest population in the contiguous United States. Lots of paranormal things occur there. The area and surrounding states are notorious for weird activity. I don't have a solid idea of what I saw that night. Maybe a ghost or some kind of extraterrestrial, or there's the standard explanation, ball lightning or some obscure scientific phenomenon. But no matter what it was, Wyoming has a place in my heart of beauty and somewhat spookiness. I live in a tiny rural community on the edge of a game reserve near the Mississippi River's oldest town, and I have been here my entire life. There is something in the woods down here in the state park though, and we are not alone. Off and on my entire life, I had felt like I was being watched when I was out in the woods. Not every time, but enough to pay attention to it in this area. I can hold my own in a fight, and although I am no Doc Holliday, I am very good with a firearm. But what good would a gun do? You can't kill something that is already dead. Enough rambling. One night, my favorite spots to go rock hunting were in the small creeks and streams on the Natchez Trace. The Trace is a historic forest trail in the US that is roughly 440 miles long. It's absolutely beautiful, and I do recommend people check it out. I started down the route to the creek. It's about 1.5 miles down a dirt path. I used to do this all the time, so I was not very worried. I made my way down to the creek with the help of a live oak branch that I've used many times before. I was on a mission that day to find an arrowhead. It was late afternoon in the summer, so the weather was terrific. A nice gentle breeze, animals rustling in the leaves, and a symphony of songbirds in the forest canopy. I was enjoying myself, arrowhead or not. I had not been paying attention to how long or how far I had been walking when a beautiful agate caught my eye. Super excited, I bent down to wash it off and put it in my bag. When I was washing the agate off, I noticed the only thing I could hear was the water swishing in my hands. No birds, no bugs, no breeze, no animals scurrying on the forest floor. Still kneeling in the creek, I had an overwhelming feeling of heaviness, like someone had thrown a weighted blanket over me. I was afraid to look up. I had the feeling I was being watched from close by. I finished washing my agate off and putting it in my bag, trying desperately to act as if nothing was wrong. I stood up and faked a stretch from side to side, trying to scan the edge of the woods nonchalantly. At that moment my stomach dropped. I did not recognize where I was. There was no way in hell I got turned around. I was walking up the creek and never got out of the water, but for some reason, this place did not seem familiar at all. And at that moment, I realized I had gone too far. The sun seemed to be setting relatively fast, and I was getting tired. Then suddenly, from about 10 or so feet behind me, came a clicking sound and a heavy deep breath with a gurgling snort. I did not want to turn around, but I had to. It was the only way back. The water was flowing nicely and smoothly in the opposite direction I was facing, so I knew my truck would be the other way. I immediately started to pump myself up for whatever I was about to see or experience. This was one of the few times I did not have a gun on me, but I did have a knife just in case. I was prepared to go all macho, especially for somebody stalking me. In this case, I would have felt better if it had been another human being, regardless of their intentions. When I turned around, there was nothing there. I did not know a thing, but the woods were still quiet. There was no sound, but the water was splashing, so I stepped my ass out of there. I had to have been about 4 or 5 miles from my truck. I was 36 miles up the track, with no ranger stations or homes nearby. I started to quicken my pace, when I noticed I was making a considerable amount of noise for just 2 feet, so I quickly stopped. My heart sunk as I heard the rustling of leaves and grass stop shortly after I did. The clicking and gurgling snorts continued. I know the animals that we have in these here woods, and they don't make those noises at all. So I quickened my pace, making a ton of noise running down the creek. Whatever was behind me was running along the bank in what sounded like significant heavy strides. The clicking continued getting closer and closer. Just then, whatever was behind me let out a scratchy shriek that made me grab my ears in pain. I removed my hands to hear it jump down into the water. I knew it was close and significant because it sent a surge down the creek. I hit a gear I never even knew I had, and no way in hell would I try and turn around and get a look at whatever this thing was. As I reached familiar surroundings, I could see the live oak getting around the bend of the tree, as if it was reaching out to help me. I knew that at that point, the truck was not very far away. At the time, I was a pack-a-day smoker of Marlboro Reds, and my lungs felt like they would explode from the pain. So I reached out, grabbed the live oak, and then my hand slipped. Just as I caught it again with a better grip, I began to pull myself up. Then, I felt something tight and painful, almost like a burn on my leg. I screamed like a madman and began kicking like a mule. Then I pulled away and ran as fast as I could up the dirt path all the way back to my truck. Halfway down the way, I heard a crow. I noticed my footsteps were the only ones I could listen to and hear again, and realized life had come back to the woods. My heart was somewhat relieved, although my legs were not slowing down. I scratched up my leg badly, and I could feel it bleeding, but did not stop to check on it. Instead, I slammed into the side of the truck and got my keys from my hide box, jumped inside, and got the hell out of there. And I have not been back since. Now, whether something had my leg, I do not know, and I cannot say for sure. It could have been an old barbed wire fence or something that cut me on the way there, because I was definitely not paying attention as much as I should have. I have heard the clicking before, but I always wrote it off like tree branches or something. One thing is for sure, I always pay attention when the woods go silent, and I always bring something to protect myself now, especially in these state parks. There seems to be something strange going on here.